Conversations about women leadership and power. So I've been very immersed in the themes that we're going to be discussing, for the past, I guess, 2-3 years. The book was inspired by my then 8-year-old daughter Lotus. Right after Barack Obama was elected president, we were talking about how remarkable it was to have our first African-American president, and she turned to me and she said, "Why have we never had a woman president?" And it was this really innocent-sounding question, but just was this. I decided to sort of use it as a lens into talking about so many different issues that I think impact not just politics, but all these different changing paradigms that are in the world. And so it's been a fascinating journey just asking these questions about what we can do to inspire more women's leadership, because, I don't know if you guys heard about what's going on in the world today. There's been another mass shooting. We've got a lot of serious problems we face in the world right now, and we need women's voices and visions as part of coming up with the solutions. And we are not adequately represented at the tables where important decisions are being made. So to me, this is like urgent crisis. And what I found from the book is that there are a lot of different interconnecting factors. It's not an easy thing to ask why we haven't had a woman president, what it will take to have a woman president. And so talking about these issues with people that are like on our esteemed panel today is always so helpful. I think dialogue and creating awareness is the first step. Before I go into the panel, I want to first thank the sponsor of this panel, which is Eileen Fisher and the Eileen Fisher Community Foundation. And anybody who's from Eileen Fisher, just raise your hand. I see all of you. Yes. Eileen Fisher and the Eileen Fisher Community Foundation and their incredible program. They have lots of programs through the Eileen Fisher Leadership Institute, which I encourage everyone to check out. They've been a long-time partner of ours and do incredible work and have incredible programs, and I hope you will all find out more. Their website is efli-life.org, and we're very, very grateful for their long-time partnership and support. So thank you very much. And I thought that we would begin, rather than my introducing the panel, is having all of you, and first of all, thank you so much for being here, who are all doing different prongs of working towards promoting women's leadership and are exemplary leaders yourself, to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your work, and then a little bit about your own personal pathway to being a leader, becoming a leader, and your growth as a leader, and maybe your relationship with your own leadership style. Because I think that's one of the things I learned from my book is that it's important to learn from other stories, and there's not necessarily one way that some people come into it naturally, some people really have to learn it. So I thought if we could just go in the order here, starting with you, Brette, and talk about that.
Sure, thank you. I'm Brette McSweeney. I'm the president of Eleanor's Legacy, and I will join in congratulating everyone who pulled this event together today. And thank you for including me. I know what it takes. It's not just as easy as sending out one email and knowing everyone will show up. So it's a lot of hard work. So thank you all for doing it and for including me. So Eleanor's Legacy. We, in a nutshell, are the Emily's List of New York State. We aren't technically connected to them, but we have the exact same mission. We work at the state and local level to elect pro-choice, pardon my cold, pro-choice Democratic women to the state and local office across New York State. And the reason we do that is because there is an absolute need. New York State currently ranks 26th in the nation for the representation of women in our state office in Albany. We're actually at an all-time high, so there's reason to be hopeful and to go fiercely into that dark night. We have 25%, after November's elections, we are now at 25% representation of women in our Senate and our Assembly. In the past 13 months, 11 women have been newly elected to the New York State Assembly. Because of, if you follow New York State politics, there's often a lot of changeover and open seats and people who are invited to maybe spend time elsewhere, not in the state legislature. when those opportunities arise, they are stepping out and taking them. So what we do is we organize campaign schools where women learn how to run and win. And when they do run, we're a pack. We're one of those packs, but we're one of the good ones. And we give money to support women running. Because at the state and local level, there's just not as much focus, especially in New York, right? We get a lot of people coming through and talking to us and sort of hitting the media circuit, but they're at the federal level. But we really believe that where the rubber meets the road and where women can really make a difference, and also what's really accessible to women is that state and local office. We were founded in 2001 by the first woman chair of the New York State Democratic Committee. Her name is Judith Hope. And she was a first on many levels. She had walked this path herself. She was the first woman elected town supervisor on all of Long Island. She was the town supervisor of East Hampton, which might sound like a glitzy thing, but it was a Republican town until she decided to run for office and take it back bit by bit by bit. I'm proud that this past year we supported women running in county local office. We supported 131 women, and 66 of them won office. 22 ran for an open seat. So once again, women getting ready and looking for an opportunity to run, I think, is a lot of what sort of changes it. My leadership style, I work alone. I have a board of directors and I have 2 interns, and so a lot of my leadership style is showing up to things like this and seeing how people do it and do it better than I do. And trying to incorporate those ideas. It's sort of the gig economy a bit. It's sort of what I have, right? Like I don't have an exact boss that I follow and replicate. I just kind of try to look around me. And I have a huge competitive edge. So whenever I see someone succeeding better, I want to push myself and know that we've got a good mission. We have a real purpose here in New York State to elect more women. So if I want to just go home and watch Jeopardy, or if I just want to read Go Fuck Yourself all day, which hopefully some of you do, I remember that there are 131 women out there who are counting on us this year, and there's going to be 131 women counting on us next year, I hope, to run for state office. So I think that's sort of, I don't know if that quite answers the question as articulately, but that's sort of what drives me.
I forgot about Go Fuck Yourself.
Oh,
I might go check it out tonight.
Well,
Good decrease.
yeah.
Hi, I'm Penny Abeywardena, and I'm the Commissioner for International Affairs for New York City. I want to congratulate Marianne. This is a pretty extraordinary anniversary, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here.
So I run an office I hadn't heard about last summer. And I'm looking at Maria because she's worked for the city longer than I have, and it is really an honor to be on the stage with her. So when the mayor's office for appointments reached out to me last summer, they talked about this office for international affairs, and I'd worked in international development in the women's rights space at the Clinton Global Initiative, but for about 15 years of my career, I was at CGI for 7 years. But I was like, how could there be this office for international affairs and I've never heard about it? And when I dug into it, it really had focused largely on the operational dynamic. So something that's pretty exciting, people think of New York City as the capital of the world, and we are for many reasons, one of which is we also host the largest diplomatic community in the world. So we not only have the United Nations, we have 193 permanent missions, we have UN affiliates like UNICEF that are based here. But also very excitingly, we have 115 consulates that work with their communities, whether it's in New York City, New York State, or the tri-state area. And so that makes New York City the home to the largest diplomatic corps. And we have a very important responsibility via the Vienna Convention as host city in terms of how we serve, support, and engage this community. I will say, this is going to weave in a little bit with sort of my leadership skills. So 7 years ago, I applied for the Clinton Global Initiative to kind of do something around women's issues. They actually hired me as their commitment development senior manager in education. And I was one of the first people that they hired that didn't come from the Clinton world. I'd worked in international development with Human Rights Watch and some other organizations. And it was a really extraordinary time because CGI was about 30 strong. They pretty much hired me because they knew that I had a strong skill set around both fundraising and pitching. I can really sell people on things, and a commitment and knowledge of women's rights issues internationally. And so over the 7 years or 6 years that I spent there, I went from working on this issue where anybody that said woman at CGI was sent to me. So if you worked on women's health, women's economic empowerment, women's education, girls' education, it was all sent to me. And at first, it was fine. It was great. I saw Jackie Zahner come in a little bit earlier. You know, it's one of these things where it was great to get the community together at the different CGI events. But as we started to become more of a sophisticated organization, and we started to ramp up, when I left CGI, we had about 100+ staff. It was about how we were working and influencing and informing how our members were making commitments. So you had companies like Goldman Sachs and ExxonMobil, you had individual philanthropists, you had governments, you had nonprofits that were thinking about more and more how to incorporate gender into what they were doing, and working with incredible leaders from community organizations around the world. I'm proud to say I stood on the shoulders of amazing organizations like the Global Fund for Women, AWID, the Association for Women in Development, and a number of other organizations who helped me inform the work that we were doing internally. And it was a process in leadership. I remember some of my 360 reviews is, you know, Penny's really passionate. You know, she clearly knows what she's talking about, but she's just too aggressive with her girls and women's thing. And I remember at first kind of rolling my eyes like, oh, what? It's just because I care about this and I think everybody should be talking about it. But it really showed me, you know, not everybody's approaching these issues from where I'm at. And how do I get more diplomatic and strategic in terms of how I'm talking to my colleagues, whether they're in communications, membership and fundraising, programming, et cetera. And it was a process of about 4 to 5 years, but I went from being the leader of the Girls and Women's track to the director of Girls and Women's Integration, where CGI actually restructured to make this role part of the C-suite so that it was fully integrated into everything that we did. So rather than somebody working on women's health coming to me, they would work with our health expert on staff while I was advising them and bringing in the experts from the field who could also advise on that. So by the time I left in early 2014, there was a director of Girls and Women's Integration at CGI, and the majority of CGI members, and I'm really proud to say most of them in the private sector, were thinking strategically around how they can integrate gender into what they can do. And I say the private sector because we have a long way to go with them, but we need them on the team. This is so much about building up allies, both boys and men, but the private sector in particular. And so that was just a great leadership experience for me to understand what that meant to bring others along with me and that process by which I was able to do it. So when the mayor's team came out, approached me last summer, this was obviously very exciting. I had never, I honestly didn't know what a commissioner did. I had to Google it because I had never looked at city politics or thought about how city government runs. And it's been an incredible learning process, but in my interview with the mayor, I was like, you realize, girls and women's person. I mean, he knew what I did, and he's like, that's exactly why I'm bringing you on board. This mayor is unabashedly feminist. We have, I know the numbers aren't good at the state level, but New York City is largely run by women. At 54%, that is the leadership of the women of the administration that runs the city. From our deputy mayor for economic development, she's the first person, to Maria, who's running the Economic Development Corporation, she's the first woman, to our transportation and sanitation commissioners, these are women. And it has been an extraordinary ride to come in and look at an agency that really has been stagnant for about 30 years. It's about 50 years old, but this is a position that's gone to those that have chosen to really focus on the operational dynamic that New York City has with the diplomatic community and not take advantage of all the opportunities that we could have as a powerful, innovative city and the kind of engagement we can have with the diplomatic and the international community. So something that I have done is, dial back the operational part. We still work on the, infamous parking program. We deal with diplomatic security issues, the incidents, all of that good stuff. That's still very important. But we've also created this very important programmatic arm. How do we partner and collaborate with the international community, recognizing that we can learn from what's happening abroad and we can share what's happening here. And so 2 examples I want to quickly share. Municipal ID. If you're not familiar with this, this is a New York City ID card that we want all New Yorkers to have irrespective of their immigration status. This means that if you can prove 3 months of residency, and for example, if you're a domestic violence victim survivor, you can list one of our family justice centers. You can get this ID card that allows you to pick your kids up from school, to access New York City medical services, etc. And so something that we did through my office was ensure that our Mayor's Office for Immigrant Affairs had all the documentation from different communities that they would need to prove birth certificates, passports, etc. But we also trained consular staff and hosted pop-up registration sites at different consulates, recognizing, depending on the country, consulates become a hub of information and security for different community members, and they can get this information in their local language. And then we hosted a pop-up registration site at the United Nations. First time New York City's taken a program into the UN, but here's an opportunity to prove that you might be a UN delegate, but you're also a New Yorker. The Secretary General signed up and got his card. So a way to show that this is something that we are doing here, actively trying to get to other communities, but also Paris, as we know that horrific attacks just happened. But prior to that, Mayor Hidalgo has really been trying to figure out how to deal with the migrant flow that's coming there, and she's actually looking to replicate our municipal ID card in Paris. So there is an exchange of ideas that's actively happening. And then a separate thing that we're really focused on is that the global community came together around the Sustainable Development Goals. Our mayor just launched One NYC in April, which is his development plan for New York City, which uniquely takes the equity agenda that we have for the city and really integrates that through all of our solutions around resiliency and climate change. And so what we have done is identify the synergies between what we're doing here and the Sustainable Development Goals and engage the international community in a conversation around sharing best practices and partnerships. So it has been really exciting to learn what I did at CGI, really having honed some of my leadership skills and bringing those that don't necessarily want to come and with the girls and women's lens and sort of integrate that into what they do. And so I'm really pleased to say that's what I've been able to do as a Commissioner for International Affairs.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Torres-Springer. I'm the President and CEO of the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Congratulations to Marianne, to Feminist.com. It's really an honor to be here for so many reasons, including Penny is one of my favorite commissioners in all of city government. So the EDC, what we do, we're the arm of city government that drives economic growth in New York City, and we do that in a number of ways. We are first and foremost, a real estate development company, dispose of city assets on behalf of the city. We're a capital construction. We have about $5 billion that we manage, building parks, sewers, bridges across the city. We manage about 60 million square feet of assets, mostly industrial assets on the waterfront. And then we also do a lot of sector growth, and so work to promote both legacy industries in New York, finance, media, to emerging ones, the growing tech ecosystem, life sciences, et cetera. So I've been in this role for about 4 months. Prior to that, I was a commissioner of the Department of Small Business Services, so doing the same economic development work, but for smaller businesses and also on the employment side, connecting job seekers here in the city to employment. So I'm going to answer the question in a little bit different way. I have come to this role and previous leadership roles informed certainly by my experiences as a woman, but certainly being informed by all of the other identities that I have. And so in many ways, my story is the classic beats of an immigrant story. My parents immigrated from the Philippines a year before I was born to California. A couple of decades there. We, like many immigrant families, they held multiple jobs, really struggled to make ends meet. And I can remember getting on a plane to the East Coast for college with $200 in my pocket, having never seen snow, a kiss from my dad, and he said, just go get him. And that was, and so, 15 years later, I find myself in different roles where I have this opportunity because I feel like in all my life, I felt very lucky to have had the opportunity to go to a good school, to get the opportunities that I have. And so part of what has informed my professional life is a very intentional effort to try to just take a little bit of that luck out of the equation for people and families who are struggling and who really want to just reach a little bit higher, to dream a little bit bigger. And so when I joined, I was in the last administration, but when I joined this one, actually, I was appointed 2 weeks before my due date for my second daughter. So I have a 6-year-old, and I have someone who's she's almost 2 years old. But I remember at the time thinking, oh my God, I remember how it was with the first kid. Am I really going to take the role as commissioner and kind of do it all over again and deal with everything? But you just, as I do in many situations, given the field that I'm in, where you're just surrounded by mostly men, mostly white men, mostly old white men, mostly old white rich men. You just swallow hard, and you surround yourself with support, and you hope for the best, and you just work really hard. And so part of, in terms of the leadership style, I guess I'll mention a couple of things. One that I always just try to live by, keep in both in front of mind and kind of back of my head, is that I feel like I have done what I've done and achieved what I have been able to achieve, not despite of those struggles or despite of those identities, as a woman, a person of color, an immigrant, a different socioeconomic class than most of my colleagues, or someone who's frankly a little bit younger too than most of the people who I work with, and not despite of all of that, but because of it. And it's because of those multiple identities that I think I have, and I hope that I have, an opportunity to do this role in a different way. Not just what the projects are, but how those projects are actually developed and executed with communities across the city. And it's one of those instances, I think I went through a long period of time where I rarely kind of publicly spoke. I never led with the story of how I got to the different positions that I've had. But there came a moment where it just dawned on me that there are times when identity can in fact spark change. And that is, I'm stepping into that, and part of it is if I can reach one employee in my organization or one person, any place where I'm at, where I'm talking about the work that we're doing in this administration and the experiences that I've had, that if they can, in their own way, reach a little bit higher and dream a little bit bigger, as corny as that sounds, I feel like all of the opportunities and all the luck that I've had will not have been squandered.
That's amazing. I love that. My name is Minnie Timmaraju. I work for Hillary for America, and I'm the Women's Outreach Director for the campaign. And I want to join my colleagues on stage in thanking, or up here at the table, in congratulating and thanking Marianne for including me. I also want to shout out Jamia and Lindsay, who have been fantastic friends and supporters since I came to New York to tackle this new role, and great advisors about how we need to be thinking about gender and feminism in the space that I inhabit now, which is a privilege because you don't always get to work on a campaign where part of your job is to think about gender and feminism. So it's pretty amazing, and it's been a pretty wild ride. So I'm excited to be here and excited to be part of it. Actually, like Maria, I come from an immigrant background. My parents immigrated to the New Jersey area when I was 3 months old from India. And in India, I had a lot of family in politics, and my parents used to take me home almost every summer until I was 17, and I would get to see all these activists in my community, and I think that never really left me. And so I had, even though I was raised in a pretty traditional immigrant household, you need to go get your graduate degree, you need to be 5 times more educated than your white male counterparts to get the same jobs, which I did. I didn't get 5 times as much education. I got a law degree, which I don't use, but it's a great title to have when you're competing with white males for jobs, and you tend to be a little bit overqualified all the time, but it's good preparation for the big fights, right? And I think we can all identify with with that kind of coaching from our parents, no matter what our race or background is, I think, as women. It's something I think that my current boss can identify with as well, even though she has had a tremendous career in life. So in my current job, just a really quick snapshot, Women's Outreach Director, I'm a staff of one, I have no staff, I have interns and volunteers, which people are like, that's crazy. And I'm like, yeah, it's a little crazy, but I'm part of a really tremendous team. And the thing about Hillary for America is because of who our candidate is, there's not one part of the campaign that's not always thinking about women. So even though there are so-called women's issues and I'm in charge of women's outreach, women are the majority of the electorate, so there's really no part of the campaign that isn't doing women's outreach or isn't thinking about women's issues. In fact, the secretary has said many, many times on the trail, if you're getting sick of me talking about women's issues, buckle up, get ready. I'm going to keep doing it because women's issues are the major economic drivers of this election. Everything from equal pay, paid family leave. Those were her very first major policy speeches. And it's continuing into her foreign policy work, much like what Penny was talking about at CGI. A lot of those values and a lot of the way that CGI approached integrating women into the entire organization, it's how we approach the entire campaign. Not for altruistic reasons, mind you, but because without women, we're not going to win this election. And frankly, every candidate needs to be thinking about it this way, because no candidate in this current electorate can win without the support of women. So we don't take it for granted. So my role sits in the political department. For those of you familiar with the Obama campaigns, this role sat in the field department. So the women's outreach person was really mobilizing individual voters. My job in this stage of the campaign, so we're in the primaries, we are very, very close. The Iowa caucuses are just over 60 days away, less than 60 days. February 1st is the Iowa caucus, and then the New Hampshire primaries a few weeks later. So my job is to liaise with all of the national women's organizations, to work with women elected officials up and down the ticket. So that's how I got to know Brette really well, and I work with Brette and her counterparts all over the country, as well as the national sister organization Emily's List. So I work with Planned Parenthood Federation of America, and I have friends here from Planned Parenthood. I work with a National Organization of Women, which endorsed Secretary Clinton in April. I'm working with, we're in the endorsement process and discussions with other organizations. We'll have a big announcement, I can't say tonight, but keep an eye out on our Twitter that we'll be announcing a big women's endorsement tomorrow in New Hampshire, which is why I have to fly out tonight. So I get the really privileged work to do that. Then I also work with elected officials who want to be engaged with the secretary. So part of the primary process is gathering our superdelegate count, right? And this was a big issue in 2007, 2008. So one of the strategies that we've employed is early engagement of our Democratic delegates. And the most significant and the most powerful in that world are our elected officials. And we have a tremendous number, thanks to the work of Brette and her colleagues across the country, of women elected officials who hold these roles. So I also spend a lot of time talking to the women senators, the women members of the House, the women governors, et cetera. There's surprisingly not enough, but we're getting there, and it's a team effort. So the other big piece of my job is mobilizing the activist community, right? So we have women who are donors and women who are big fans of Hillary Clinton. How do we engage them in a way that's effective in the primary process? So right now, we're not doing big get out the vote campaigns in New York, right? But we are asking our friends in New York to mobilize and help us in places like New Hampshire. So organizing women from other states to call women in other states where we have an active campaign. We're not running a campaign in all 50 states right now. It's not economically feasible, but we are trying to be really strategic and targeted. And our women, we know, and you may, if you watched the last debate, and I know it's a lot to watch a debate on a Saturday night, and that last debate was on a Saturday night, but if you watch the last debate, you might have caught the secretary say 60% of her donors are women. So that's an interesting statistic because that tells you, and that's a historical statistic, and Brette can talk more about this too. It's very rare for the majority of political donors for any campaign to be women. So that's a glass ceiling that we're already beginning to break already, and we haven't even gotten past the primary. But that also tells you women are our base of support across the country, women of all ages actually, and so having them continue to be engaged and energized and active as advisors and leaders in the campaign and allowing them to have a space to self-organize is a lot of what I also do. So we recently launched Millennial Women for Hillary. It was a space for younger women to organize themselves on the issues and in the way that they care about. We'll be doing that all over the country. We also have, I had just had a call today with a group of moms who said, we want to organize Moms for Hillary. It was like, great, we're going to give you all the tools, and then you're going to organize Moms for Hillary because I can't organize them for you. We have Women of Color for Hillary that's already started. We have African American Women for Hillary. A couple of weeks ago, a group of Latina leaders, including Dolores Huerta, started Mujeres por Hillary. So we've got, I mean, you name a group of women, and we want to empower them to self-organize because we know women are natural organizers. And we want to create every opportunity for them to engage with us, and it's much more effective and exciting that way. My leadership role, my leadership style, I've had about a 20-year career going in and out of politics and government and the C3 civic engagement nonprofit space. So it's interesting some of the things I think, Penny, you said, or maybe it was Maria, maybe both of you. There have been times in my career, I started off as a legal aid attorney in the family courts, working with abuse victims. And then I moved into campaigns and elections. And then I moved back into government. And then I moved back into campaigns and elections. So I've gone back and forth. And at some points in my career, I've been told, your elbows are too sharp. You know, you're too aggressive about what you care about. And then I've turned around and gone from, and that's almost always when I've worked in an advocacy space. Often with other women, to be frank. And then when I move over to a campaign space, and I mostly worked on campaigns. I'm from Texas. I spent most of my life in Texas. And I mostly worked on campaigns in the South, that were predominantly white male dominated. And I would hear, you don't have sharp enough elbows. You're not gonna survive this place if you're not gonna be more aggressive. So it's been a little schizophrenic. So I've had to learn, you know, just much like and I think my immigrant background helped me a lot because I lived in these difficult places where I was the only person like me. So I had to learn when to deploy my otherness to be my strategic advantage and when to adapt, right? So when you grow up as an other, you do learn how to adapt kind of naturally. So if I was in South Carolina working on a Democratic campaign, they could send me to the African American Fish Fry. They could also send me to the Latino, mobilizing event. And people just kind of generically didn't know what my otherness was. And I was like, I'm the only person of color on this campaign. I'm going to take all of those things. I'm going to say, I want that. That's mine. You should give me that assignment. And the white guys didn't want those assignments. So I developed some expertise. And that was really, I learned to embrace that and love that. But now that I'm older and later on in my career, I've realized, I have to be a little bit more aggressive on behalf of my own self in my career as well. So that's, I think, a trick a lot of women of our generation are feeling, and I have so much admiration and respect. We have a lot of people who complain about millennials. I'll say my two sentences about that, even though it wasn't part of the question. I have a lot of respect for the millennial women I'm meeting in the campaign space because they are able to be aggressive and advocate for themselves in a way that's still feminist and feminine. They're not choosing to ape like white male corporate or white male like campaign behavior. When I was coming up in the campaign world, it was sort of like you act like the white guy or you act like the other, and I did feel every other day I had a different identity depending on who I was talking to. And the younger generation, I feel, is much more integrated in their personality, and they're able to make change being authentically who they are. That's been my experience. And my leadership style is, I was mentored by a lot of strong women, and I continue to want to mentor women, even though I don't have a big staff. I have 0 staff. But I have a lot of young women who come to me and say, I want to help Hillary. And for me, that's what gives me the energy to wake up every morning, even though sometimes I'm just spending 20 hours on the phone talking to difficult people, which is a big part of my job. I think it's a big part of all our jobs. But what gets me through that day is knowing that there's going to be younger women on the other side who are going to get to learn and grow from that experience. And that's what, to transition, that's what the first woman president to me is going to mean, right? An entire administration where we're, much like your mayor has, uplifting women in every piece and training and mentoring and giving women that experience. I mean, that's where the revolution happens, right?
Great. Well, thank you all so much, and it's, you know, so positive to hear all these sort of inspiring stories and great work that everyone's doing. You know, one of the things I was, though, reminded about in doing the book are how low the numbers really are, though, when you really look at them in terms of, you know, less than 20% of Congress, 20% of the Senate. Of course, we've never had a woman president, and even in the corporate world, the numbers are just as low in terms of Fortune 500 companies and chief executive officer positions. So obviously there's
diplomats too.
senior diplomats too. I'm sure that there are so many
There are
statistics.
39, I think there are 39 female ambassadors out of 193
Wow.
countries to the UN.
Yeah.
And I think it is about 30% or 40% consuls general. It's really, really low.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, I feel like that sometimes we don't even like really take that in and think what that means for how, the stewardship of our country and the world. So I guess my question is, this is one of the things in doing the book that I also discovered is there's a lot of challenges and obstacles that are keeping women from leadership positions. Some, you know, are structural, some are psychological, these kind of like internal glass ceilings that women and girls may feel. So my question, and I will have some general questions for everybody and then a few targeted for you as well. And so whoever wants to answer this question, but what can we do to encourage more women and girls into positions of leadership, and what changes are needed structurally, culturally, institutionally to help facilitate that? Whoever wants to answer.
I'll go first. So I have two ideas. I have one great one. I will put it out there to the universe, and then you all will make it happen. I think we need a Title IX for student leadership, for school council, for like university board. Because what have we seen from Title IX, from the anniversary of Title IX passing, which was, what was it, about 30 years?
Yeah.
Is that what we're celebrating? We see parity in women in sports and women achievement beyond that, right? So why not the same? My personal bailiwick is to see more women elected, so why not put that emphasis right there from the get-go when women are forming themselves? So make that happen, somebody, and I will take credit, or share credit with you. The other idea is, as you touched on, from Marianne, from the political perspective, what we need to do is ask every woman that you know, and ask yourself, look in the mirror, and ask yourself when you're going to run for office someday. And you make that commitment to your community board. If you live here in the city, that's that's just right in your own backyard, your neighborhood, or whether you want to haul it up to Albany. It is a beautiful ride along the Hudson. I can't tell you how beautiful it is. I really can't. So if you want to go up to Albany, every woman on this board will make that happen for you, and women here today. I often say that politics, it feels like it's a merry-go-round, and it just never stops, right? As soon as there's one election, we're getting ready for another. Or as soon as there's one open seat, somebody jumps in. So it often feels like, where do I jump on? How do I get going? Or also, sort of similar to what Minnie said, it feels like maybe you have to be Aaron Sorkin, right? Or you have to live in an Aaron Sorkin world to be that guy who's walking down the hallway, so snappy, and you know everything at your fingertips. It's not like that at all. We at Eleanor's Legacy are a resource for you, and we would want you to carry that message out to the women in your lives, that there are resources out there, and if they're sitting there shouting at the TV or crinkling their newspaper, they should take that energy, or even all the women that are coming forward and saying, we want to be mujeres for Hillary, or moms for Hillary. The next step those women should do, I would love to see all of them then be turned around after 2016 and a beautiful January 2017 inauguration to say, okay, now when are you going to run?
Absolutely.
Right? You came forward, you helped one woman, now it's time to help yourself. So those are three things. Title IX, ask yourself, and then ask the women in your lives.
That's great. Thank you.
So I'll jump in, and I completely 100% agree with everything Brette says. Of course, I'm biased because I also come from a space where right now I'm trying to elect a woman candidate. But I do think that's really profound. So I think women in leadership, one thing I would say is a lot of women in leadership don't always take on that external role. Right? Like sometimes we're like, well, okay, I do my 9 to 5, I'm a CEO, I have my business, but I'm not necessarily like blogging and writing and going on TV and like doing that public appearance piece, because I think a lot of women aren't about letting their light shine. I don't think that's conscious. I think it's unconscious. And I think it's also because a lot of women have 20 jobs, right? They're running their company, or they're running their nonprofit, they're running their commission, they're running an agency, and then they're a mom. right? And then they're a caregiver to their elderly parent. And that's too many things to then be out there self-promoting. So I actually would ask all the accomplished women here today to do a little bit of a better job promoting yourself, because that's the only way that next generation of girls and the younger women in the world are going to be able to see that your life and your career is possible for them. So to me, the number one barrier is that we're not seeing role models or examples. And even though we know personally so many dynamic women, you don't see them. We don't see them in the press. We don't see them in the stories. So that's huge. That to me is a PR project just to uplift women of substance who have meaningful careers would be huge. And then, number two, totally 100% self-servingly, elect my boss president.
Done.
Here's why. We put out a really cool video yesterday. You may have seen it. It's called 44 Boys is Too Many. It was written by a bunch of little girls who wrote letters to the secretary, and our digital team, who's our amazing PR digital team, reached out to the families, and we got a lot of these young girls on video, and they're reading their letters, and one of the letters literally says, "Why hasn't there been a woman president? 44 boys is too many." And Gloria Steinem posted on our Facebook, so we were really excited about that. But I can't tell you how many fathers keep coming up to the secretary on the trail and saying, "Thank you, because now my daughter knows she can run for president." And we're actually hearing it more from fathers. I mean, I think moms get it. They're like, yeah, of course. But the dads are more, oh my God, this is a transformative experience for me to be at this campaign rally with my daughter, who previously wanted to be, this is a personal story, my niece wants to be a makeup artist, right? And I think that's fantastic. So I've introduced her to like really important makeup artists. Like, this is a career, you could be an artist. But I think for her parents, they'd like her to think she could be president. Like, there's nothing wrong with being a makeup artist, but you could also be president. But there's a part of her that doesn't believe that, right? And she's not going to believe it until she sees a woman president. So does that mean that's our entire campaign? No, but we're having some fun with it. And it is not the only reason you should elect Hillary Clinton president, but it's a good one.
I have one I'd like to jump in on, and this is from a personal experience. I really do believe strongly, though, it's funny because we have one man that joined us, how we engage boys and men in this conversation. Something that is personally irks me is women are always talking about mentors, and I feel like men always have like advisors and sponsors. And I look at the success of my last 10 years, and quite honestly, he thinks I'm joking, and I don't even know how much he actually did it with purpose and intention. But the CEO of the Clinton Global Initiative is somebody who saw raw talent, and supported that. And I, always knew how to make a business case for him. CGI is a membership organization, and we're the primary, one of the primary fundraising vehicles for the Clinton Foundation, which does incredible work around the world. And so I knew how to talk to him from that business standpoint around girls and women and the Clinton Global Initiative. But quite honestly, if I didn't have a strong supporter who was in power, I wouldn't have been able to do what I do. And guess what? Most of the strong people in power are the older Caucasian males. And so I think it is so important in terms of how we engage them and bring them on board. President Clinton is an incredible ally to the movement. The Mayor de Blasio is an incredible ally, President Obama is, and it's incredible to work for these types of administrations, but how do we do that within corporations, within other government agencies? And so I just think it's really important about how we think about engaging men in this conversation as allies, sponsors, advocates.
Thank you. Do you want to?
I think for what I try to do is in the roles that I've had, try to, despite what are sobering statistics and still huge challenges and not enough progress, is not be despondent about it and figure out what I can control and what can be done in the little worlds that I'm in. And so for an agency like EDC, it's about 520 people, big enough so that it has impact, small enough so you can actually start to see culture change and can start having hopefully a real impact. And so when I think about what it means to promote diversity and inclusion generally, certainly including women in different leadership roles, it is about, not just the structural things, maternity leave, equal pay, anti-discrimination, but about building the type of culture and climate where women can see that they can continue to advance in the organization, that they, and really intentional efforts to think about the pipeline for recruiting women, people of color, into these lanes that have traditionally been male-dominated, but not stopping there, what it means for promotion, what it means for mentorship, what it means for coaching, and then what it means for skill building. And so it's not just the technical skills, but to the extent that you believe that part of the gap here is not just in possibly technical skills or even areas like being results-oriented, but there's a grit and resilience that is needed to continue to advance in one's career. I think those are skills that can be trained and can be built as long as we're intentional about it in the workplace. And we have, so since I started, in the 4 months, I think things big and small. Big in the people who, 5 people who are direct reports to me, 3 are women, and they're the chief financial officer, our chief legal counsel, and our chief real estate officer. So not just the roles that you might think women would fill. We also started employee network groups for different communities and invited, and the entire organization showed up. And so it wasn't just if you were if you identified with that group as a woman or a person of color, but it is all of the allies as well. To things like making sure our lactation room wasn't always so shitty and dirty, which it had been, and making sure that there was a paint job, or that when we had our company-wide meeting, one of the things that I heard was at the last one that everyone who happened to be on stage, both because those were the leaders before, but because the people chosen to make presentations, it literally, except for one person, it was all white males. And then the one woman who spoke talked about the new adoption policy and talked about spring cleaning. And so I had my first company-wide meeting a few weeks ago, and it was a heavily curated. I wanted to see the entire list of everyone who's going to be on that stage, and over my dead body was that group not going to represent the diversity of our city. And so those are the types of things that are, at least I felt, relatively within my control, and I think everyone has those tools as well in your organizations, in the roles that you play, in order to make the type of to start to see the type of change that over the long run, when my daughter, who is 6, I am just waiting for the day when the 2 presidents that she will know will be, the first African American president and the first female president. And I think that's extraordinary. That would be extraordinary.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. And, I think the other thing that I think about is that it's not just about getting, women into leadership positions. It's also, during the interviews for my book, a lot of people spoke to me about creating space for women leaders not to feel like they have to conform to traditional sort of leadership styles, the way it has been done, and creating space for women to lead in a way that's more authentic to them and be able to model new paradigms of power and leadership. So I just wanted to get everyone's thoughts on that, or not everyone, whoever would like to weigh in on that, in terms of how can we create that space so that women can lead sort of more authentically in the way that they are meant to do.
We need to run more stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it becomes very structural.
Yeah, I think what Maria just said about that team meeting, that's really illustrative of the problem. I mean, and the solution. I mean, she can do that because she's running an agency that has 500 plus people. That's really important to the city's infrastructure and finances, right? I mean, and the impact is so much more powerful. I mean, I think It's so important. So when Secretary Clinton was Secretary of State, she started the very first office on women and girls. And there was, Milan Verveer was appointed ambassador of the Office of Women and Girls and was focusing specifically on women and girls throughout the globe, right? And that was very similar, like the very similar stories that I've heard from folks at the State Department, lactation rooms, simple policies that were frankly mostly in the State Department, but and then the appointments. I mean, every 5 minutes I'm meeting some woman leader who was like, I was at the State Department, I was an ambassador, I was this, I was that. Like, oh my God, was the entire State Department run by women? I think it was, right? And the global impact that has, right, as the external facing agency that's talking to the rest of the world, and women are running all of these major departments. I don't think there's a replacement for that. For actually having women be in power, but then also leaning into it and being deliberative the way Maria was with her team, being very specific. So one last thing I'll say on our campaign is we have these amazing women who want to support the campaign who are in HR and wanted to talk about, and had given us they were there to raise money. We met them because they were raising money for Hillary, but they were experts in implicit bias. So our fantastic chief diversity officer, who's an African-American man, was like, Minnie, could we bring in those women donors to come in and do a gender bias training for our staff? Like, it starts there. And he actually raised it, not me, which I was like, wow, I'm sort of embarrassed that you thought of this before me. But again, he's our diversity and HR expert. But it starts there, right? By having a campaign where everybody has access to the tools, which you don't get usually if you're not in a big Fortune 500 company.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to ask each of you a question I think is sort of specific to your area of expertise, which ties into what Minnie was saying. But Brette, I guess talking about tools, what advice would you have to a woman who wants to run for office or just wants to become politically active?
Right. My first piece of advice is you already have the power, that you know how to manage your own life. You can certainly handle bringing together people to help you manage a campaign, that if you don't mind public speaking, then that's half the battle. If you do mind, there are opportunities such as at Eleanor's Legacy or elsewhere where you can beef up that talent. So the first piece of advice is you've got it. The second piece of advice is we need you. Once again, 26th in the nation, just 25%, although an all-time high, just 25% in Albany. At the end of this year, there'll be 14 women on the New York City Council out of 51. New York City's never had a woman mayor. There are 0 women serving on the Buffalo Common Council, so it goes from each corner of the state that New York needs to find an opportunity and sort of band together. And I like to say, make 2016 not just the year of the New York woman, but the year of New York women, a plural, up and down the ballot. So those are my first 2 pieces. You've got it, step forward, and we'll help you.
Great, thank you so
Simple
much.
as that.
I'm going to go to Minnie because I know that
Yeah.
she
I know, I'm
also...
sorry, I was looking at the traffic. The airport. It's not great. It's okay.
So you answered one thing that I was curious about what it would mean to have a woman president, because I think you're right. I mean, I think just for inspiring more girls and women into leadership. But I'm curious about what role you think gender will play in the presidential race, and also just in terms of, are things getting better in terms of sexism in the media, in terms of from your perspective? I feel like there's been more of a pushback when there are sexist comments being made about the female presidential candidates or female leaders, but I'm just wondering from your perspective, what role do you think gender will play, and also, how do you think the current situation is?
Yeah, a great question. So the role of gender, has it become better? So I think we're in a Democratic primary, and the good news is we're running with candidates who are feminist and are very respectful. The media, a lot of it is the implicit bias. I don't think it's overt sexism. You don't see as many stories about hair and shoes, but I don't think that's an accident. I think it's because of the great work of all of you and all the feminist leaders we have in the room and in the universe who are pushing back and have been pushing back, and the great work that the folks who've been elected, who are women, have done on their own, to push back on those narratives. So that ties in. So has it gotten better? Yes. But I don't expect the relatively idyllic situation we're in right now to continue next year. Should we be fortunate enough to win this primary, I suspect what we've already seen little snippets from the other side. You might remember a couple of months ago, Mitch McConnell said, you know, God, Hillary Clinton just keeps playing this gender card. She keeps playing the gender card. Every time she talks about equal pay, she's talking about the gender card. And the secretary, our digital team, fabulous as always, came out with a really fun like video where they had like cards, and each card had like playing cards, and each card had like an issue, right? And it was something like paid family leave. Like, these are our gender cards. We're just gonna keep playing them. And she's now, her favorite line of the stump speech is, if you're gonna accuse me of playing the gender card, deal me in. Like, I'm in. So yes, it has an impact, and it's going to get more explicit. I think the sexism, we should just be ready. We're ready, right? Listen, Hillary Clinton is used to being the only woman in a lot of tough rooms, okay? But there's also a reason there hasn't been a woman president. And we can't be so naive as to say, it's gotten so much better. This is just gonna naturally happen. So my call to action for all my feminist friends, men and women, is to be ready for it and to be ready to name it and call it out, because that's the only way for us to change it.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, we are all ready, Mayor, to support
I know. Whether you support her or not, I think there's a role for all feminists to be calling it out.
Yeah, I've been heartened. I mean, I was saying that I think, you know, in fact, when my book came out, I was almost concerned it could be too closely affiliated with just being like an endorsement of Hillary, regardless of my personal politics. I think it's been so helpful to have Carly Fiorina running.
Yeah.
Because I was really, when Donald Trump said that comment about her face, I mean, everybody, bipartisan, rallied to her support. That was unacceptable. So I think that I've been heartened to see, especially, we're talking earlier in the media panel about how important the role of, you know, the internet and social media is. I think, you know, we've got her back, so.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I really am sorry that I have to leave this
No,
amazing
thank you so
panel.
much.
And my favorite thing is wine reception, so I'm really bummed about it. Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay, what is it? Okay. All right, so we're running out of time, so I'm going to try to quickly get to some of these last questions. Penny, one question, you've done a lot of work globally, so I'm curious about your perspective about you know, how we can foster sort of women's global leadership and how that is different from the challenges that we may have in the U.S.
You know, that part of the reason I was talking about the private sector earlier in terms of the Clinton Global Initiative context is that's where the real billions are, right? So philanthropic dollars, especially looking at it globally, are not as significant as you need to tackle the challenges that are happening. And so one of the efforts that I really tried to promote through CGI was how do you work with the private sector to care about women in their value chain, right? As consumers, as producers in their supply chain, because when you don't have women coming to work because of domestic violence and that's impacting your bottom line, you're gonna give a shit. Maybe not the way that we would want them to care, but that is where really interesting programs start to happen around talking and dealing with domestic violence and offering services, et cetera. Not ideal, not where we need everything to be, but we've got to start somewhere with the private sector. And that's where there's a real opportunity to move billions of dollars globally into women's issues and supporting, empowering women, or rather enabling them on the global scale. And I think that is true also of, you know, of what's happening in the US. Now, I'm living in a sort of a New York City context that's always trying to compare to what the global community is doing. It's a conundrum I've chosen to put myself into and actively use my agency to promote. And one of the things, you know, that we need to really focus on domestically are the structural issues. Everything from, and something that Ambassador Revere has said for a very long time was, you know, the U.S., it's moronic because women make up now more than half of the workforce, but all of the sort of policies that dictate women in the workforce were established 50 plus years ago when women made up about 25% of the workforce. And so it is just insane that there is nothing that is really looking at how do you support, encourage, and enable women in the workforce in this country. But I think that there is that sort of economic empowerment angle that that can be used really strategically, in particular with the private sector. And so,
Thank you so much. And I guess, Maria, I mean, you are, you broke a milestone yourself. You were the first female to run the Economic Development Agency. How do you feel about reaching that milestone? And also, what challenges do you face, working in such a male-dominated real estate world and industry, and how do you handle that?
Well, I'm extraordinarily privileged to be in the role, and it's definitely a also a responsibility that if you're male, like the many males who've been in this role, you probably didn't feel. But I try not to. One of the things that I think women do a lot, you shoulder everything, like the aspirations of generations you feel like those are on your shoulders, and I try to not do that too much because that does not seem like a good recipe for success. But in the role that I've been in, there are, I can say that I have experienced overt harassment or discrimination, but there are the kind of small indignities that put together can take a toll. And so just today, meeting with someone and with my chief of staff, who's a little bit younger than I am, and the person left the room and said, "Good to meet you, kids." And there are comments like that, or even at our company-wide, we did a Q&A, and I was reading through the cards. One question that I didn't read out loud, but was there is, what's the secret to your hair? And so, and I could name a few more, and each individual one, I just laugh and then brush it off. But it both becomes kind of evidence that there's still a long way to go, but also that in the face of those indignities, kind of big and small, there is an opportunity, again, to kind of swallow hard and do what you can, and to work with, for me, the women in our organization to create that space, which for me primarily means just listening, letting people test out different leadership styles, being a little bit patient, thinking about different forms of success, knowing that for some women it means ricocheting in and out of the agency, but having them believe that they can be in that agency through their childbearing years, for instance, and that it is not life and death. That all of the stress that they have about being a mom, coming back, still getting the promotion, being on the Plum projects, that is, one, it's normal, but two, that there are people who have been through that, and a community that can act and be supportive, and that I want them to stay, that we kind of need them to stay in the organization.
Well, thank you all so much. I mean, for everything that, all the great work that you're doing and the inspiring role models that you are as leaders. And one thing that I always like to say in talking about this topic is sometimes we think of leadership in very, traditional ways of leadership, but we all are leaders, and just the importance of using our voices and voting and supporting the candidates we believe in and speaking out against injustice and just being a leader in whatever way is, natural or appropriate to us. So we have time for maybe one or two brief questions, if anybody has any. Yes?
What advice would you give to young women who are trying to mobilize themselves into the positions where they can create change?
Love that question. I can start. One is to speak up, and to own your voice, and know that voice doesn't necessarily have to be loud or of a certain tone or tenor, that it is your voice, but you have to make it heard. The second, and these are like sometimes a string of cliches, but I've tried to live by them, is to, as you climb the ladder, not lift it up behind you. And to do kind of your part in coaching and supporting women leaders who will come up after you. And then just the last thing is to not, for me, it's to not take anything for granted, that you are owed nothing. And therefore, it is really important to both be grateful and to also, in many instances, put your head down and get shit done.
Well, thank you all, everybody. Thanks so much.